Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Grantees Position for Success Seminar Series. The seminar for June 14th entitled Proposal Planning and Development. As you know, this seminar series is hosted by the Georgia Rural Health Innovation Center here at Mercer University School of Medicine. And on today, we're certainly pleased to have as our guest speaker, Dr. Gretchen Bentz. Dr. Bentz joined Mercer University School of Medicine back in 2014 and is the Director of Student Research, the co-chair of the school's Foundations of Medicine first semester curriculum, and an associate professor of biomedical research. She grew up in rural Pennsylvania and received her bachelor's degree from Juanita College, her PhD from Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center, Shreveport, and her postdoctoral training at the Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For the past 15 years, she has been conducting research here at Mercer University and other entities. And in doing so, she's been quite successful in obtaining funding for her research for at least 13 of those years. So she's very knowledgeable about seeking funding and obtaining it, as we can see. And so on today, she's going to be sharing information with us on proposal planning and development. Also, let me not omit, in her free time, she enjoys spending time with her husband and two sons. So at this time, I will pass the virtual mic over to Dr. Bentz to present at this time.
I forgot to unmute myself. So hi, everybody, and you can just call me Gretchen. Sorry if it seemed weird, my introduction. I didn't know what to add, and so hopefully we can have this as very laid back. So if you have any questions during the time, just don't hesitate to ask. And I do want to just point out that I am not a population health person at all, but I do think maybe some of the stuff that we have done with, I'm a basic scientist, could still relate to what you guys are doing and what you guys hope to do. And probably one of the biggest things that has helped, our department here started we call it GRIP, but it's Grants in Progress. And it's because we have so many different scientific backgrounds in our department. This is really helpful, like having a Grants in Progress where we sort of help each other out with writing and making sure that it's understandable, I think has really helped across the board our department in getting funding. And so if that is something that you guys can do and set up, it might be very beneficial for you. And so I did notice that some people were asking about how do I even find grants. And so I did a quick search of some of the places that you could go to find different grants. And that includes grants.gov, found that candid.org is another database that does a lot of different foundations, as well as the Community Foundation Locator. And then our libraries at the medical school have a subscription to a directory of different foundations. And so you could do that. And then one that came up that seems to do a lot of rural or community types of grants is also walmart.org, which I never knew that. And so that was really all I could find that I have on finding a grant. And because, as I said, I am not an expert on foundation grants or anything like that. And so Kedrick would be more helpful with that. But as for writing a grant and what you need as a proposal, to simplify it very much, and then I'll expand on this, it's really, the initial step is just doing your research, finding out as much as you can. Then everybody mostly focuses on preparing your proposal, but I honestly think doing your research is more important. And then being able to sell yourself and your group to be as concise and realistic as possible when you're doing it. So when I do didn't know if someone had a question. Sorry. So when you're doing your research, there's a lot to do even before you start writing a grant. Okay, so the big thing is you have to do your research on the funding organization to gather as much information that you can about that organization, see what their purpose and goal is. Like, so I know some of you have the Sow a Seed grant here from the Rural Health and Innovation Center. And so you know that you can go through their website and find out things that are important to them. And then sometimes you can also use snippets that you can find on the organization's homepage as wording in your grant to make sure that it matches. And so that there's no question that what you're proposing to do is directly related to what that foundation is doing. And so with GRIC, it's really making sure you're from the rural counties, and that your goal is really to improve the health outcomes in that community. And so it is very important to just know what your funding organization is and what they would like to be able to give money to. And so some of you in the future might be going more towards a more government grant. And so that is when the Health Resources and Service Administration, that might be a good way as like a next step to a larger grant, that they do have grant programs for rural health. And so I would probably spend a good amount of time then going through like these websites to learn as much as I could, to identify what overall HRSA's grants and their purpose and goal is, to be able to use similar vocabulary than in a grant that I would be preparing. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, and so you also want to make sure that you do your research on your eligibility for funding, and just keep in mind that it does constantly change. Things change from year to year. And so sometimes you will be eligible for the funding and sometimes you're not. These are just the ones for the Sow a Seed grant funding, but just for an example from what I had in the past was, so because we are a smaller institute and we don't get a lot of money from the National Institutes of Health, we can apply for one of the grants that is mostly for undergraduate, but can be for professional schools. And probably 4 years ago, they changed the grant eligibility so that it was only for undergraduates. And so they had to come up with a whole new program for professional schools that are not big on gaining research funding. And so just remember, they will change. You maybe down the road, when, because GRIC is growing and it's always becoming bigger, they might change, and they might decide that a certain aspect is not going to be eligible anymore to receive funding from them. And so you just never know. So just make sure that you are going to be eligible for the funding, and then also be able to identify the people involved. People are surprised when I say I'm shy, because I really am. It's hard for me to reach out to people, but being able to identify the contact person is very important. And because you can usually call them up or email them to see, this is my idea, what I was thinking of, is this something that would be viable to obtain funding from you? And they usually will be able to tell you that. There's also, like for us, we have program officers. You can sometimes even send them your grant prior to submission, and they can tell you like if it's on the right track or anything like that. And so identifying these contact persons or contact people, even by phone or by email, here it says that Kedrick would prefer things by email. It's just knowing that, and knowing that they really usually are there to help you and to give you advice, and they really want the best for you and to help you actually get the funding. And so they are there to be in your corner. So use those people. One thing I never really thought of when I started grant writing was also knowing who is going to review your grants. As I said, you are all community, like working in the community, more population health. And so if it was someone like me who was reviewing your grants, I would need a lot of the very basics to be explained. And so if we look at, say, the ones for the sow the seed, you know that it's going to be people in public health as well as the Georgia State Legislature. Just think that they have a very different background than what a practitioner has, or someone in finance, or even the people in grit. And so this is going to be a wide range of people reviewing it. And you have to make sure that you remember when you're writing your grant that it is to people who are not in your field of work. And so that has been probably one of the hardest things to do, because like I know for me, I can use abbreviations that to me are very common and a lot of people in my exact field uses, but the review study section that reviews my grants and that will be giving me a score, a lot of them are not even virologists, because I study viruses, and so they wouldn't even know. And so just remember, like, and if sometimes they'll list even the people who are on a review committee, and you can look up to make sure that you would be writing to someone who has the background knowledge that they have. And I would probably making a generalization here, but I would think a lot of people in legislature are going to be more like law and business and not as much public health background. And so it will be important to be able to write in a way that they will understand. And so in addition to doing your research, you have to come up with a list of what is needed or what will be evaluated. And so usually that will be a CV or a resume, as well as letter support, as well as your proposal. If you go to the Sow the Seed, they do have a nice list of everything that is required for them, because they have 3 different types of funding that they do. There are 3 different page limits. And so just knowing what is needed and sort of the amount of space that you get for the total application will be important. However, you do have to keep in mind what are the scoreable factors, because if you look at, say, what the scoreable factors are in the Sow a Seed, you can see like innovation, impact, sustainability, and target. They're not as apparent that that's what you're going to be scoring on as what is included in what is needed. And so knowing that, okay, you have to make sure that you have innovation in there or an impact, I would just flat out say, this is my innovation, this is my impact, this is my sustainability within these sections that are required. And so just to point out for sometimes how much, in addition to just what you're proposing, is important. For the grant that we apply for here in basic science, we're graded on innovation, significance, the investigator, the approach, and the environment. So really only 2 of these are really dealing with the proposal itself. The others are outside of that, and some of them we don't have any ability to control. And so I can't control my environment or basically what we have in the labs here. And so you have to be able to make sure that you can explain or promote myself and my environment to the best, and be like, oh yes, we can do this work. And so just remember that it is more than just what you're proposing to do, like who you are matters too, and where you are and everything like that. So it is a lot more than just we propose to do that. We're going to reduce smoking in our vaping in high school students or something like that, that there's more than just your proposal that will be evaluated. And so then another thing that I find that has been very helpful is do your research on who has been successful in obtaining whatever grant that you're going for or proposal. I'm probably going to use grant and proposal interchangeably here today. And so identifying those who have been successful is is what I have found to be very helpful, because that could help identify the type of organizations that do get funding, the people who are involved in that, as well as what issues they have addressed, because you can maybe see what did or did not work for them. And I actually sometimes just reach out and ask, would you be willing to share your grant with me? And just knowing that you don't, make sure that they know you don't want a copy of it, you just want to use it as a guideline. And I have people even now, so before I came here, I had what is considered a transition award, and they are very sought after. And what helped me the most in obtaining that is I found one of my friends from graduate school had also obtained that same grant, and I could use her proposal as a model for what to include in mine, to talk about what my training will be and what I will do and everything like that. And so again, just make sure that you're not copying it word for word, just use it as a guideline for what to include, how to make things stand out, how to word specific things and things like that. And sometimes you can find online examples of grants. People might post them that, oh, I received this award and or this funding for this proposal, and this is what my proposal was. And so you can do this, but I've had the most success in just asking for copies of other colleagues' proposals and using that to help develop and mold mine into being successful. And so after you do all of your research, which can take a good amount of time, it's now on to preparing your proposal. And the biggest thing is to start early. It's always hard to do it like a week beforehand. I usually give myself a good 2 months at least to do it and to create a list. And so I would go back to that list of what was needed. If we go back to here, I would have a list. I need all of these sections. I would need X number of letters of support. I need the CV. And I would go ahead and just sort of make a calendar and set deadlines for each section that I need to complete, so that I know I need to have this done by then. If I don't, then everything else is going to be pushed back. So I might have to spend longer on that due date, that self-imposed due date, in order to get it done. But I need to have deadlines so that I'm sure I have it done early enough that I can review it, proofread it, send it to someone else to review or anything like that. But just also remember, you have to identify what you will need from others, especially letters of support, because everybody's busy. And so sometimes even with these letters of support, you might need to offer to be like, I will write the letter, send it to you, you proofread it, edit it how you need, and sign it and send it back. And you might need to keep on bugging them to provide you your letter of support. So just make sure you give yourself some wiggle room. Don't have your due dates the day before everything has to be submitted. I would at least give yourself a week of wiggle room in case, say, some of your colleagues or your people that you're going to work with might take longer. And again, just have time to allow others, and I have a typo here, sorry, it should be others, to review your proposal. And so again, going back, this is the list of what a seed program would have. And so I would just write everything out and have a deadline for everything. And so you could sort of summarize this, what is needed for the sow the seed to what would be needed for other grants, in that you have just a summary of what your project would be, the key personnel involved, and the environment where it's going to be done, your plan overall, as well as your budget. And I'm hoping that you guys cover budget on one of the other talks. And so again, you also have to keep in mind what are going to be the scoreable factors for when you're writing the list, because you want to make sure you're spending your time on what is going to be scored and what you're going to be evaluated on. So when you get to the project summary, it's always listed first, but it's usually the last thing that I do. And overall, you just want to highlight and summarize your proposal. You don't want to have things written out word for word. It usually is going to be much shorter. and it can change as you're going through and writing your projects. And so that's why I usually complete it last, and because it can change as you develop your project. However, just remember that reviewers will read this first, and if it is badly written, if it has a lot of grammatical errors, it's going to skew your reviewer's view of the whole proposal itself. And so it is a very important aspect to have of your proposal. And so just making sure that it is well written and has aspects that will catch their attention and interest and show the importance is going to be very important. And oftentimes it will have a word limit or a line limit. I think usually for me, mine is like, it's limited to like 30 lines of text. And so I don't believe for Sow a Seed that there is any sort of limit. So just keep in mind that sometimes there will be a word or a line limit in for this summary. And so when it comes to basically the key personnel and the environment, just remember who you are is important. It is so important to sell yourself. I don't know about everybody else, but the way I was brought up to be very humble. And so it's very hard sometimes for me to promote myself and to say, yes, I am the best at this. And just remember, you really are going to be probably the only people or person that is proposing to do exactly what you are doing. And that makes you unique, and that makes you important. And it's important to maybe show out what makes you different from everybody else. And you really want to be able to clearly explain why they should give you the money. They should give you the money because you are the best at what you do, and you are the only one doing it, or one of the very few doing it. And it is important for this community that you're going to work with. And if you can have proof of previous experience, if you've done something previously that is similar to what you're proposing to do, that is always a plus. And then if you're not an expert in something, like I've never had to work on animals. My work is always using just cells in the lab. So if I know that I am not an animal expert, I would not know the first thing about working with mice or rats. And so if I want to do any of those experiments, it would help for me to find a collaborator to work with. And so you form these little groups of people that will work together, and you want to highlight the strengths of that group usually, as to show that I've assembled this team and this team is the best that it can be. And it is very hard, I think, in general, for people to be able to say, yes, I'm the best, because that sometimes can seem to be off-putting. But just remember that you are selling yourself. Most of us are not salespeople. We don't have those tendencies of being able to do that, but you need to make sure that you can sell yourself, and just don't sell yourself short, and just be able to point out, you are great at this, you have experience doing this, you have a team that is top of the line, and they should give you money for that. And that, even with like reading other colleagues' grants, that is universally usually the hardest thing, because in general we're brought up to be more humble and, oh yeah, I can do this, instead of I will do this, not and I have experience doing it. As I said, it is sometimes a little difficult to do, but just know that selling yourself will help, because it is an important aspect of your proposal. So when you move on to your project proposals, it can include a wide range of things. And so knowing what your goals, your purpose, your outputs, your indicators, activities, and methodologies are all important. And it goes back to knowing who your grant reviewers are, to remember that you need to write so that a reader from any different profession can read and understand your proposal. As I said, there are going to be acronyms that you use. There sometimes could be statistics that you're going to use that some other people might not know, and you might have to explain. And so just remember the background of your grant reviewers, and that you're writing so that they can understand it, not so that you can understand it, but that someone who is not an expert in your field will be able to understand and appreciate what you're proposing to do. And so when they're reading it, you really want to have a hook for your proposal. And so this, and what I mean by a hook is just something like the first statement of your proposal is going to be something that will draw the reader in. It will highlight either the impact of what you're doing, the need that is there, the money that is relevant, or anything like that, that will really make, even in the first sentence or two sentences, the reviewer say, oh yes, this is a very important thing that needs to be done. And as I said, some of these examples are going to be for basic science, but I'm hoping that you can see that just as an example of what to do. And so the first one was a grant that someone wrote about, and it was about bladder cancer and using basically a bug or a microbe as a way for treating it. And so they started off, there are over 80,000 new cases of bladder cancer each year in the US. And that the current treatment, there's a shortage going on in the US. And so that really highlights, okay, 80,000 people, that's a good amount of people that are getting just new cases every year, and our current treatments aren't working. And so it really highlights the impact of the effect of bladder cancer and what we're trying to do to treat it. A second one would be, and this is from my colleague down in Savannah, and basically benign human herpes viruses cause significant worldwide morbidity and mortality. That's not as strong of a one, but just knowing that, yeah, there's nine viruses together infect almost 100% of the people and cause a lot of morbidity and mortality in the world. The one that I used in my research is going back to, in the US during the past 2 years, almost 2 million people were diagnosed with cancer, over 500,000 people died, and an estimated $150 billion were spent for the care. And so my work deals with viruses and cancer. And so it really just points out there's a lot of people, a lot of deaths, and a lot of money that goes into this. And so we need to come up with better ways of treating it. And you always do want to relate it back to what that foundation is doing. And so say for like sow a seed, or probably for a lot of your work, it's going to have to relate to some of the grand challenges that are facing in rural Georgia. And so I went and I looked up I actually didn't know all of the grand challenges that they identified for rural Georgia. There is a long list. And so all of you are working on things like this. And so I picked out a few that I tried my hand at writing a hook for. And so with like maternal health, I said, Georgia has the worst maternal mortality ratio of any state in the country. And over half of these deaths are preventable. And it's something that really just impacts you, like, oh, I mean, you could say that we have more maternal death than Syria and North Korea or something like that. But just knowing that how bad it is for women, specifically women of like minorities in Georgia, it's very sad. Or if we go to more like social determinants of health, having numbers and being able to relate percentages. A 2020 study revealed almost 5% of adults living in rural areas had suicidal thoughts within the previous year. And the current pandemic has increased this number. Sorry, this should have been on the next one for suicide. And so just knowing that, I mean, 5% is still a large, I was surprised to know that. And so I am sure there are going to be people who would be really surprised to realize 5 out of 100 people have suicidal thoughts within a year. And this is going to be much higher with a pandemic. I think Dr. Barkin has, and Dr. Warren and Smalley have all been doing research looking at the increases of suicidal thoughts with the recent COVID pandemic. And then I never really thought of the aging populations, but because people are living longer, there are also a bigger movement of younger families moving from rural areas more to the city, to know that almost 20% of the population in rural Georgia is over the age of 65. Or you could start that saying Georgia is ranked 50th in the nation for healthcare for seniors. And so just have a strong statement that really highlights the need or the importance of what you're going to be doing. And so as you go forward and move on in your writing of the proposal, just remember to be kind to your reviewer. You never want to make your readers guess or assume things. You want to keep it as simple, clear, and concise as you can. Use very plain language, limit your abbreviations. I was on a review panel back at the end of March, and one of the grants that we were reviewing, it was unanimous through all the reviewers that there were just too many abbreviations that we could not keep track of different things. And so again, just remember, not everybody will be using those same abbreviations. And so try to limit that. Make sure you define what it is at the first time, and you might have to redefine it later on. And so try to write your proposal as if it's the first time the reviewer is going to hear about either your problem or your project. And so for what I like to do also is make sure that, okay, gaps in our knowledge, or you could even state it out like what this county is missing or what this population of people need, and just list it out. And so they don't have to read paragraphs. They can just see really a short sentence of what this proposal will do, and just list it out. Having lists, I think, is much easier for me to read and review than having paragraphs. And then remember to be able to just highlight what your innovation is. And this is one of the people the faculty members down in Savannah. She was working on a autism website, and she was saying how she was at a meeting and there were people from Atlanta there, and they're like, well, why are you doing a website and not an app? And so she asked me to come up with some ways of highlighting innovation for her to send back to her program officer to help in the request for money, because she was like on the bubble of being funded. And so I found, and granted, these were from newspaper articles, as not as much as from like a reputable journal, but it was interesting to see that, like, and this was just from experience, like reliable internet access is limited in much of rural Georgia. And they even used buses as hotspots to allow students to do their schoolwork during the pandemic. And so many families in rural Georgia lack reliable computer access, which requires them to travel to their libraries for any computer-based work. And those families that do have access, they use their smartphones to use internet searches as opposed to using apps. And that could be a generation thing, because later on I found that Generation Z is more prone to using apps, as well as the millennials, Generation X, or baby boomers who Sarah was targeting with her grant. They're more used to using internet searches than apps. And so if you can find data that support you and things like that, and then just highlight if it's conceptually innovative, if it's incrementally innovative, or just to highlight that it is innovative in itself, and to be able to just state, this is the innovation because that is what you're going to be evaluated on, and this is how this proposal is going to be innovative. And so overall, as you can see, this is just, again, an example. You don't have to read through it all, but if you're given a long paragraph like this, it has a lot of information in it, a lot of facts. You want to first make sure that everything is going to be legible, but if you can summarize it with a figure, I would say do it. And so it's helpful that we work on similar viruses, but I could summarize what he said in this paragraph as a much simpler table that you can then use to highlight what was important to his grant. And so if you can say it in a figure as opposed to writing it out, the figure will draw the reviewer's eyes better. And if it's a well thought out figure, it will help them understand things better. We all like pretty pictures. And so as you're going on, just make sure that you're writing as yourself. Don't use your passive voice. Make sure that you're being persuasive. And just remember, more than likely, you're going to be more of an expert on the topic that you're writing about than your reviewer is. And so you have to write it in a way that they will understand. You want to have usually shorter sentences. You want to have them be more active, dynamic, and forceful. And some ways that you might be able to do this is say, we will do interviews of 50 people and these are the questions we're going to ask, instead of we would like to, or we plan to. First of all, it takes less words, so you have more space for other things. And then it's just more exact, like, yes, we know what we're going to do. It's not, we're thinking of doing this, we're going to do this. And so you might say might or will instead of it could be because of this, or it should be because of this. Just use stronger words. You also want to use concrete nouns and adjectives and active verbs, but use fewer adverbs and adjectives. One of the things I find with some of our master's students and even some of the medical students when they come in here is they're so used to writing as they were writing an English paper, say in college, where you use flowery words, and the bigger words, the better. And really in proposals, you don't want to have flowery words. You want to keep it as simple as possible and just make it straight to the point and cut out what is not needed. And then make sure that you're writing in a natural voice. Bigger words does not mean a better proposal. Bigger words probably means someone might have to Google to see what that word means, and that will sort of leave a bad taste in their mouth. And so sometimes I wish that my computer was better at picking up scientific words for me to be able to just speak it and then have it written down as I speak. So just that, to make sure that it's written in a very natural way of how you normally speak it. And so it is important to, as you're writing it, is to make sure that you have literature that will support what you have done in the past and what you're proposing to do in the future, and have literature that will support any of the data or numbers that you are giving, that you are presenting. And so make sure that you're selecting relevant references. There are a lot of journals that are not considered the highest caliber. When my oldest was very young, he was diagnosed with a lot of food allergies. And so I joined an online community for like kids with food allergies. And this guy started talking to me and being like, it's because you vaccinated him. It's all because you vaccinated him. And I was like, no, it's not because of that. I was like, it's other things. And he's like, read this paper. And my response to him, I'm like, okay, the paper is published in a journal with a very low importance, and it's more of a predatory journal and all this stuff. And he's like, I was the one who wrote the paper. And I was like, oh, pointing it out. So just make sure that your references are coming from reliable journals. You could probably always reach out to one of the librarians at Mercer. They have ways of determining if a reference is valid, if a journal is good, if a website could be good. And you just want to be able to demonstrate that you are knowledgeable about the area and that you are able to develop a meaningful question or issue that you will address. And so it is important also to have literature to support as many aspects of the proposal as possible. Again, if you can reference your own work that you've done in the past, that is also very important. And just keep in mind, some funding organizations will expect certain styles for listing your references. For me to save in space, I found that using a superscript number is helpful because it's much smaller. It doesn't take up as much room. But one of my colleagues is an anatomist, and she's like, no, I could never do that. I need to put in where it's like the author's name and date, because otherwise those are going to be the people who are reviewing it, and they'll be mad that I didn't list their name in the proposal itself as a reference. And so just know that there might be some regulations on how you're going to have your references either written out in your proposal and your bibliography. And if possible to do it, the easiest way is just to have it numbered. But that is something to pay attention to. And usually the organizations will sometimes list, this is what we expect if it's going to be the normal. Because another thing is for like us, for every journal has a different way that they write out a reference. And so there are some styles that are more prevalent than others. So different foundations might have different ways of organizing it, but having supportive literature is going to be very important. And sometimes you can't find online access for a journal that you might want to be able to read an article. And so you might have to do like a interlibrary loan. Even I think most of the libraries, like the rural libraries, you can even request for them to get a loan from another library to be able to read a paper. And so when you're going on to more of your objectives and what you're going to do, make sure that they're going to be very detailed. I was reading somewhere that they came up with the acronym of SMART to make sure that they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And so first you'll want to identify the problem that you will address. Again, have the literature supporting it. And then you just want to have those very detailed statements that will describe what you will do to address the problem or achieve your goal. And I honestly, I never knew this before preparing for this talk, but it is very important to have measurable outcomes. You can't just say, we're going to decrease it. You will more so want to make it have numbers and goals that you're going to obtain and know how you're going to measure it, and maybe have some experience in doing that type of evaluation. And make sure you're using action words such as deliver, develop, establish, improve, increase, produce, and make sure that they're very active and not very passive. And so looking more at the measurable outcomes, you need to maybe describe what you expect to happen and what will be considered a success, such as reaching a set number of people or increasing website traffic. And so, as I was saying, I want to stop students from smoking or vaping. My 11-year-old was telling me about students vaping in elementary school. Instead, have it measurable. Say 90% of schools will institute campus-wide non-smoking policies or campus-wide vaping policies. Or say you're looking more at like food deserts and things like that. I want to ensure that people eat more fruit. Maybe have a set population in mind, and again, have numbers to instead be like, I want to increase fruit and veggie consumption in children by 50% within the next 2 years. Or if we're going more for just healthcare, I want to improve patient compliance among people with low literacy. Instead, it's saying the exact same thing, but now you have a measurable outcome of, I will develop pictorial instructions to improve patient compliance by 10% in the next year. And so just make sure that there is some measurable aspect that you will be doing to see if what you propose to do is working. And there's going to be a bonus, or it's always good if you can show that you're already measuring your outcomes at even before, even in some preliminary data and supporting data. Excuse me, sorry. And so it is important to be very specific with those measurable outcomes, to clearly state how you will track the information. Do you have experience doing it? How will you know if you are successful? How will you know if it's working? How will you know if something needs to be changed later on, and things like that? So just be able to have as many specifics in there as you can. And so overall, you do want to keep in mind the style, going back to making it as easy on the reader as possible, leaving spaces between paragraphs, using things like bold, underline, italics, or changes in color to highlight important statements. As I said, I like using lists instead of paragraphs when I can, like, so and say, we will do this, and just list it out instead of having it all in paragraph form. Try to stick with using normal fonts. I really like Arial, but just ones that have normal spacing instead of something that is flowery and harder to read. And in graduate school, our chair told us, he's like, always assume your reviewers like me. And he's like a 60-year-old man with bad eyesight. And so that you're writing in a large enough font that it's clear enough that I always tell, even now I tell my medical students, I'm like, I have old lady eyes and I have trouble seeing because I'm so not nearsighted. So make sure that things are going to be big enough and clear enough that they can read it without having to have the paper up to their eyes like this. You do want to pay attention to margins and make sure that you're not making them too narrow, as well as include a page number at the bottom. And so on the next slide, I'm going to have a right and a left side. And I want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind sharing, which one draws your attention in first, and I'll explain why afterwards. And you don't have to read it, just which one would you probably enjoy reading more? Anybody want to share?
This is Cecil from Reach to Teach. I would actually enjoy the one on the right. It has more space.
Yes.
First jumps out at me that it's not, doesn't come across as crowded as the paragraphs on the left.
Exactly. And here I use spaces, I used lists, I highlighted, for highlighting, I underlined things that I thought were important, because this is sort of like the importance of my work, is that there's no published reports on this beforehand. And I'm writing out what we hypothesize to do and highlighting what we will use and what we will do. And then I also sometimes use bigger font to highlight where a section starts and things like that. And I've never actually done the change in color of the font, but it's something that I saw in the last review committee I was on. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because nowadays, a lot of us do just read it on the computer instead. And so that is a viable option, because we used to just print it all out, and then having a change in font color wouldn't always be recognizable. And so again, yes, these have different things on them, but just remembering, make it so that things can catch their eyes. They can, even if they're flipping through it, their eyes can go to, oh, this was important on this page, I remember this. And sometimes it's even say there was a heading up here, and if they print it off, they would normally staple it, say, in the left hand corner. I want to make sure my heading is going to be then in the middle as opposed to the left side. And it's crazy how much style is important, and how you're presenting it is important in how the reader is going to respond to it. And so overall, then so moving forward, just looking at like the time frame and sustainability, you just really want to be able, as I said, clearly state how you'll execute your plan, what will be done, when it will be done. I usually have a table of what will happen in year 1, year 2, year 3. You could have it done by months. And then also, like, how are you going to do this beyond the period of funding? Is this going to be the foundation for another grant? After you're doing this, is there a second step? Say, first, you're going to reduce, you're going to you're gonna reduce vaping in elementary schools by 50%. Next, then it's gonna go to middle school, then it's gonna go to high school. Like maybe say like what is gonna happen after this. It could be a one and done type of a proposal, but if you have future plans that would relate to it, you can include those in usually there too. And then once you submit it, the most important thing is proofread, proofread, proofread. I am a terrible proofreader. And so I found these quite funny because this is actually my case. I do my best proofreading after I already hit send, as well as having SpongeBob at Burger King would be great. He can come here and hire our managers. If you're able to get another colleague or a professional to read it, that is usually very helpful because they can usually find grammatical errors, because you already know in your head, if you're trying to edit it and proofread it, you know what you are meaning to say. And sometimes it's not always there on the paper, or you have a typo. Also, if you're able to form a grant writing group, that could be very helpful too, as well as finally just pay attention to deadlines, as well as the time of the day. Sometimes it's going to be noon, sometimes it's going to be 5 o'clock or midnight, as well as the time zone, because we're all on Eastern time. Sometimes the grant deadline is on Pacific and you have a little bit of extra time. And so just the time zone is important also. And so finally, if you don't succeed, don't worry, just try again. You can, I mean, for NIH right now, usually it's between a 10 to 20% chance of getting funding. And so you submit multiple grants just trying to get one to work. And so just keep on trying, make changes. You can always ask, go back to the contact people and ask them for advice. They sometimes can have additional information to a review sheet that you can get back from the review committee. That contact person might be able to like, oh, they really wanted you to do this instead of that. And you can even contact those who were successful and ask for advice, things that they might suggest doing. And just in general, just don't give up. And then the final tips, know yourself, the funding organization, and the reviewers. You want to make sure you're keeping it smart. You want to have numbers and or statistics to support your case. You want to be able to provide details and have a measurable outcome, and you want to be able to sell yourself and your group. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize I went a little long. And I'm hoping that some of this was a little bit helpful. And so if anybody has any questions. And if you want, I will send this updated version also to Kedrick, and he can send it out to everybody.
This is Cecil from Reach to Teach. I don't really have a question, but I did want to say that the information that you shared, I found it to be very, very helpful. It confirmed a lot of things that I saw in writing the proposal last year, and saw where I basically did a good job in certain areas, and in other areas where I need to improve at. It was very detailed. I enjoyed what I heard and look forward to improving my writing ability on proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, okay, we had to write grants in graduate school, so I've been here a long time doing this, and I am still learning new things now when I'm thinking about writing grants, because there's always ways to make it better.
I don't have I'm April Smith. I don't have a question. I really enjoyed that presentation, and it's been very helpful. Will we be able to get a copy of it?
Yes, I'm gonna forward it to Kendrick now. I'm gonna fix my one typo though, if I can find it. Oh, I'll just save it as it is. Yeah, I'm gonna forward it, and if he can send it out. Oh, and if you ever want, I don't know how helpful I can be. I can try, but my email, I'll put it in the chat also. If anybody would want to email me about a question.
Hey, this is Rachel Shorey. I just wanted to say thank you for the suggestion to contact the like the main grant contact. I always just assume that those people are too busy and are not interested until I have everything together. But it's helpful to know that that's acceptable, and I will be trying that in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Kendrick does have other jobs and duties, but for like those at NIH, it is one of their major part of their jobs is to be able to interact and take those types of questions. We even had, so the meeting I go to is called the International Herpes Virus Workshop, and the program officer it always goes to that meeting, and he's constantly surrounded by people just going up and asking, and just like, and he's always willing to do it. And so for some people, it is their whole job to be there to answer your questions.
Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, thank you so very much, Dr. Bentz, for that wonderful presentation. It was extremely informative and certainly valuable to our attendees on today. Also to our attendees, I can certainly email the slides out to each of you, and also the recording of this presentation will be made available on our website later this week for your review and convenience in the future. Also, before we depart, we just want to remind each of you that we have 2 more seminars as a part of this seminar series coming up on July 12th. The title, Engaging Communities with Enthusiastic Communication. And then on August 9th, closing out with Activity Assessment Amidst Implementation. So again, Dr. Bentz, thank you so very much. Thank you to each of you all that attended today. And we look forward to seeing you next month. You all take care.
Bye, thank you.